the amazing privileges of my life was to be invited by my cousin Robert Fleming and John Hallward, founders of Pace magazine in Los Angeles, to become the research editor. And so I spent close to 5 years out in Los Angeles doing the research for Pace magazine. And my job was to find maybe 20, 30 stories for the editors each month. That gave me the most wonderful excuse to go out and talk to all kinds of people. For instance, I was out at the Navy Yard, and this man in a wetsuit said, "Catherine, man is going back down under the sea." And I thought, isn't that fascinating? So that led to a whole net series on underwater and friendship with Joe McInnes and so on. Canadian who had this little vessel going down under the Great Lakes. Amazing stuff. And I also learned that if I didn't do very careful research, it could cost the magazine money. If I passed on to the writers research that wasn't completely, tested out, it could cost money. So that was a valuable lesson. So my job was research. And so I saw this article in the Los Angeles Times about a young man, age 16, who set out from the harbor to sail around the world. Imagine setting out at age 16 with 2 cats in a small sailing boat to sail around the world. So I went down to the port to try to find out about him. And they put me in touch with his aunt. His aunt put me in touch with Robin Lee Graham's parents, who had an avocado grove down the coast. So I went down to this avocado grove, which was a lovely experience for Canadians. We don't have such a thing here. And met his parents, and they told me how to be in touch with Robin Lee Graham out at sea, to send a letter to him at the islands where he'd be touching base, Fiji and so on his way to Australia. So I sent off a letter. Next thing I know, I get back this amazing letter. "Dear Catherine, yesterday my mask went overboard. Fortunately, I was attached and I was able to get it back." And I thought to myself, yes, indeed. So this letter, which one of the senior editors helped me, that became an article in Pace magazine. So then I was leaving, at the end of my stay at Pace, I was leaving to go back and work with the magazine in New York for a year. And at the airport, I talked to Robin Lee's parents. And they said he had come back, he was on his way back around the world, and he'd met this wonderful girl who was going around the world on a bicycle. Not on a bicycle, on a motorcycle of all things. And they'd met in Australia, and then she'd meet him in South Africa and so on. And that they had moved to Montana with their little baby. And Robin Lee Graham's father said to me, "Catherine, there's a book there, but it'll never be written." So I quickly, from the airport, phoned the senior editor of Pace magazine and said, "Do something. Be in touch, and here's Robin Lee's phone number in Montana." So that the net result was the book Dove, which became the movie. Gregory Peck turned it into a movie. So that was my first experience as being a literary editor. So that was the story of the 16-year-old who sailed around the world, all by himself with 2 cats and his homework. So that was just a little glimpse of both research, careful research, and discovering a story that you just had to tell. You had to write it yourself. So that, when I think of it now, I realize that was all part of the background of myself doing a book eventually. But then the amazing privilege for me was working alongside Neil McKenty. Now Neil had a capacity for writing. He started writing when he was 9 years old, if you can believe it. He won an oratorical contest. He wrote the content for it, age 9, and he never looked back. Here's Neil, 15 years old, running away to Peterborough to see if he could work under Robertson Davies, his famous editor of the Peterborough Examiner. Fortunately, one of the senior men said to Neil, "All right, we'll give you a job as a stringer for Hastings, and you're to report on events in Hastings for the Examiner." And you will see a piece that Neil wrote about that experience in the new book that we've put together about Neil McKenty Live, and that'll be available on Amazon. And it's just it's a wonderful, it's a whole new edition is being published of that by lightmessages.com. But Neil, he never looked back, and he and his cousin bought an old Dodge car for $35, and Neil put a big sign, "Press," in the windshield, and they toured around Hastings and got all the news, and if you wanted to be in the newspaper, either the Examiner or the Hastings Star, you had to talk to Neil. Then one of the most moving things happened to him. The first young man from Hastings was killed in the war, and Neil went out and met his family and wrote about that, and that whole write-up was published in the Peterborough Examiner. And Neil never forgot that experience of writing about something that was so powerful. Working with Neil was amazing because he could write so fast. He could pluck a metaphor out of thin air without blinking an eyelid. And I learned so much about writing, and it was just so encouraging to me. And I think all that went into my own experience of writing my own book eventually.